We continue our work in the Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Now our topic is presentation and discussion of the report of the Human Rights Information Center, Situation of Human Rights Protection in the Territories Controlled by Ukrainian State 3 years after Maidan. Our speakers are Titiana Pechonchyk, Chairman of the Human Rights Information Center, Hummel, Director on Policy Issues of the Netherlands Helsinki Committee, Dmytro, Sherembei, Chairman of the Coordinating Council of the All-Ukrainian Charitable Organization, All-Ukrainian Network of People Living with HIV/AIDS, and Maksym, Director of the Coordination Center, Pravozakhusnyk, Mykhailo Berchuk, activist who protects the environment in the Vlasivka village of Kirovohrad region, and Potarska, consultant of the International Women's League for Peace and Freedom. Welcome. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm Titiana Pechonchyk, and I represent the center, the Human Rights Information Center, and today we invite you here in order to discuss our report, the situation of human rights protection in the territories controlled by the government of Ukraine 3 years after Euromaidan, and we prepared this report supported by the Netherlands Helsinki Committee, and we have the representative of this committee here with us, and also the Polish representative of this committee. And when we prepared this report, we were working on it for more than half a year, and we wanted to see what are the main problems that activists and human rights defenders face in the territories that are controlled by the state. We didn't take into account the actions when activists and human rights defenders were prosecuted in Crimea and in the territories that are not controlled by Ukrainian state. Maybe we will prepare another report about these territories, but now we would like to look at the territory of Ukraine that is under jurisdiction of Ukrainian government, where a law enforcement structure is in place and judicial structure is in place, and we would like to see the situation with the human rights and the human rights defenders and civil society activists and how they defend the interests of people. And I would like to focus the attention on the fact that we understand the broader these issues of human rights defenders and civil society activists. So these are people who strive to protect the public interests and the human rights in the territory of Ukraine. And according to the resolution of UNO, we focused also on the activists who also dealt with environmental or land rights, or they fought corruption or organized crimes, or they dealt with the issues of some public interest. And this report reflects any cases when their work was somehow some obstacles were created for their work. And also we have 50 cases when there were interference in their activity, those people who protect human rights. And this research, this is not a full scope, because there were many cases, but our aim was not only to create this full-scale analysis, because maybe it would be more difficult to do it. We wanted to analyze those facts and trends, some systemic actions in the work of public activists and civil and human rights defenders. And we also recorded the cases of protection of human rights in the movement of the freedom of association and freedom of assemblies, the facts of beatings, and also the cases of arsons and other illegal actions directed at these people, and also there were some administrative and criminal persecutions and smear campaigns against activists who worked in the ATO zone in Donbass, and also there were some other violations, and I would like to briefly outline our main conclusions we've reached when we prepared this research. So, speaking about overall atmosphere for the work of human rights defenders and activists in Ukraine, we may say that at the level of realization of the basic freedoms, we recorded some negative trends and interference in the activity of these people. But in Ukraine we have freedom of assembly, freedom of movement, and we have better protection of rights than in authoritarian states. But speaking about freedom of movement, the main problem, in our opinion, is that Ukrainian government limited access of international human rights defenders to Crimea, because the procedure that was established at national level in order that international human rights defenders were able to get a special permit to visit Crimea and to carry out their work there. This procedure is complicated and bureaucratic. It takes a lot of time and effort, and there are cases when people even got rejections and they didn't have this permit in order to carry out their work in Crimea. Speaking about peaceful assemblies, the biggest problem here is with the LGBT community, and during the last 3 years we saw a number of cases when LGBT activists were banned by court to hold their assemblies, marches, festivals in different towns of Ukraine. Speaking about freedom of assembly and association, here we see recent interference. This is the introduction of e-declarations for anti-corruption activists, those who are against corruption, and they, as officials, they have to declare their assets, and this is also interference in the freedom of assemblies and unions. And one of the major problems we saw is physical violence in relation to those activists who fight for the protection of rights. And we also observed the cases of threats and beatings, and so cases of arson and different types of harassment, and this wave of physical crimes, physical violence against activists. This is one group. Second group is activists who are the proponents of environment and land rights, those who are against the destruction of forestry or parks, or against some dangerous hazardous plants. And sometimes these people, they also counteract corruption that they find at local level. One more group that was systemically their rights were violated. The LGBT community activists and the feminist movement activists, and there were beatings of these groups. And also two groups that suffered from physical violence were volunteers who helped servicemen and those who suffered in the course of the conflict, and also who helped displaced persons, and also there were beatings of and attacks on volunteers in different towns, and also the lawyers who suffered because of their professional activity, also who defended human rights. And also we also recorded the case of killing and arson in the offices, and arson in the cars, and destruction of property. And in our report we want to draw the attention of the public to such a dangerous trend as following and the surveillance over people who fight corruption, and sometimes personal data of these people were put on the internet, and that was a basis for smear campaigns against them when people tried to show them in bad light, to say that they are corrupt people. And we know that these materials were disseminated in the media and they were published at different sites on the internet. And these smear campaigns were directed, as I said, against anti-corruption activists, against those who wanted transparency in state procurement in order to provide the procurement of state in order to provide state procurement of medicines to international organizations. And also there were smear campaigns against activists who worked in Donbas, in the conflict zone. They were blamed in separatism, or peacekeeper side put them on the list, and there were some publications in the media that were disseminated, and they were discredited, and their personal data was published. And also we recorded some cases of criminal persecution of the activists, and they suffered because of this. Those who fight corruption and those who also protect environment, and we will tell in more detail about Dmytro, Sherembei, Vitaly Shabunin, Vlasivka, and also Kachina Lake defenders, and also some administrative persecutions. In this context, we can remind about the case of Maksym Korniienko. This is the activist that was sentenced to 15 days of administrative arrest because he carried out monitoring of the court hearing. And this is the overall picture. And about these cases, you can find information in our report. And I would like to tell you about main conclusions we made while this publication was made. So in Ukraine, there is no proper, there is no such a system of persecution of human rights defenders and activists, but there is inefficiency of judiciary and law enforcement bodies, and also there are no active reforms, and the situation deteriorated because the level of criminality increased after a start of military actions. And human rights defenders and activists who protect the public interest, they are proponents and the main drivers, and when they see some unfairness, they try to interfere, and then they are under threats and attacks, and there is impunity that prevails in the country. We analyzed that the majority of cases when these attacks or batterings of activists happened, these cases are not investigated, and we count on the cases, only several cases when these investigations were efficient. So this impunity, it is massive, and it increases. So when this battering, some violent crime happens and there is no proper investigation, there is big probability that it will repeat once and once again. And here we have an activist from Kirovohrad Oblast, from Vlasivka, Mykhailo Berchuk, and he was attacked in autumn last year. And this investigation was not carried out. They didn't find who it was. And in March, he was once again bitten. And Mr. Verholov in Pravozakhusnyk, he fight for environmental rights against constructors. And 4 attacks were made against him. And his offenders, they were not punished, and we believe that impunity is the main problem, because these crimes go unpunished, those crimes against human rights activists, and also inefficiency of the law enforcement system. And there is also a dangerous trend. This is smear campaigns against anti-corruption activists, and we see that now there is no proper response from the side of society and power and this smear campaigns, and there can be some legislation that limits, that narrows and creates obstacles for the realization of anti-corruption efforts, and personal data of the activists are in open access, and based on this they prepare these dirty publications. And I would like to say about Russia, there civil society is in very difficult situation, and it started with the smear campaigns that now happen in Ukraine. And if civil society is ruined, if then the authority would attack even more and will limit narrow legislation concerning the work of these activists. And third key conclusion and a dangerous threat that is at the systemic level, at the level of power. This is the introduction of e-declarations for anti-corruption activists, and a lot of international organizations and Ukrainian organizations are against this. And there were promises to create a working group and review this, but we do not see any steps in this direction. And the power starts its advance on the civil society, and we are afraid that this will be a bad scenario for Ukraine. And now I would like to give the floor in order that the activists who suffered from different types of persecutions, those cases that are in our report, they will tell you about cases they face when they try to defend human rights. Now I give the floor to Dmytro Sherembei, who heads the network of people who live with HIV/AIDS. And Dmytro, after 3 years of Maidan, he was several criminal cases were started against him. There were some smear campaigns against him, and I would like him to tell you about these actions. In 3 minutes, I would like to outline why it happens in Ukraine. Let's imagine if all the activists in this country will keep silence. Let's imagine such a situation. So this will be the most favorable conditions for corrupt officials and the start of criminal cases, physical threats, and threats of criminal investigations. This is the form they want, just to keep us, that we remain silent, and they just want to stop our activity, and they want to continue this robbing. So if you want to defend the rights of people and other people, they have some commercial interests. So we understand that there are different interests in society, and they start criminal cases even without a plaintiff. So there is no person who brought a petition. There's no such person. Prosecutor's General Office, they just read some articles, and for example, they see that there is some crime in it, and they continue to search for information. They understand that there can be a crime in all of this, and all other instruments are included, and they take your time, your effort, your enthusiasm. So this is a latent form of threat. And 1, 2, 3 cases are started, and it gives a lot of energy out of you. And in these 3 years, more than 400 hours of interrogations we experienced. So and it happened, and we understand that if we surrender, if we then that part will win. So law enforcement bodies, they didn't start any criminal case. So about the threats or smear campaigns against NGOs or civil society organizations in Ukraine, and we addressed to start a criminal case. And there were the embezzlement of 40 million hryvnias, and we provided full package of documents against one top official, but they didn't start the case. But they started the case during 1 hour because they find some article in the on the internet, and they started the case starting from this article. So they just invent the reasons for interrogations. So there is a big list of organizations who are present here, and at the national and the regional level, they observe these obstacles in their activity. And our position is simple. So, and no criminal case will stop us. No criminal proceedings will force us to keep silence. And those people in power, they should understand this. Ukraine changes due to the fact that people become free, and we are ready to fight for this freedom to the end. And we believe that we will close the criminal cases against us due to our efforts, and no matter how many criminal cases will they start, we will stop corruption and we will change Ukraine. Now, Mr. Berchuk, Paralympic Games participant, and he fought against with an enterprise that pollute environment, and he became the victim of 2 batterings, one last year and one this year. Please tell us about the situation and whether there was some investigation, some response from the law enforcers on these beatings. I was dealing with this starting before 2014, and I worked at the plant that is based in Vlasivka village, and there is a big plant that produces margarines and oils, and it is known both in Ukraine and abroad. And there is a violation of the norms, some technical and ecological norms are violated by this enterprise. So the law of Ukraine is violated, and the main is Article 50 of the Constitution of Ukraine, the right for a good environment and good health. And in 2013 there was a fire at this plant that was extinguished during 4 hours, and this oil is dangerous for environment. There is a lot of chemicals, and any blow can just pollute the area and the village and Kremenchuk town and the whole area. And my mother died from cancer, and I got fired from this enterprise, and I started a campaign among the people in the region that this enterprise harmfully influenced the health of people, and there are allergies, and it spread throughout the village, and this enterprise do not have proper filtration systems. And information appeared about the building of soya plant, and we had an action in 2016, and we brought attention to the public, and it led to the fact that in the next months, on the 10th of October, they attacked me, and there were witnesses of this case, and 2 people attacked me, and in 8 months, and criminal case was started, and in 8 months, this is the case that is on 20 pages only, and there is delay in investigation. Police tries to inefficient. They're just inefficient. They cannot do anything. There is full impunity. And after assembly, after 11 of February this year, and it concerned soya production, soya processing plant, and on the 14th of March 2017 at 10 a.m. I was attacked with the use of baseball bats, and they were not masked. They were not afraid of anything, and they left in the car, and there was a video registration of the fact, and the witnesses, they saw this numbers of cars, and now I know there is some falsification in this case, and now it is stated in the documents that the attackers, they were masked, but the witnesses that were beside me, they protest against this. So law enforcement bodies, they just keep silence, and they just want to provide this information and to stop any investigation because it is connected with big money. That's why I want to say that if these criminals are not caught, then I believe that the 3rd case can just kill me, and there is a threat to my family. I was hospitalized to the emergency room of the hospital, and I had an operation there, and I have a hole in my head now, and it never disappear, and this was the act of threatening of population, and it really influenced on people, but life goes on, and we should really care about the future of our people and about the territory we live in, and we should fight for our rights, and this is the main idea of activists, and also as parents, and we live here, and we should fight no matter at what level you are, whether you're rich or poor, whether you are in good health or not. We are all the same before the law, and unfortunately in our state, laws are working only partly for us, and democracy does not work for us, and we should change what we have now. We should change laws, and we should also establish proper responsibility of the law enforcement bodies, and only then there will be changes in the country. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you, Mikhail.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mykhailo. I would like to give the floor to Maksym Korniienko, who was watching the court's proceedings in Kharkiv region, Vlasivka district. He was taping to his mobile phone telephone set the criminal proceedings, and he was arrested for 15 days for this video recording. We were addressed by Roma people, and they said that they are forced to give money, and if they will not give this money to investigators, they will be then convicted. Well, I arrived to the court sittings, and at the courtroom I saw the woman without any special judge dressing, and she was a judge. She started insulting me and scaremongering me, and she told me to stop the video recording. I answered that I do not need any permit for recording to my telephone set of this criminal court proceedings. Then there was a pause and the court sitting declared, and I was no longer allowed to enter the sitting. After that, still I entered. Then the judge told to the court administrator to force me out to go out of this courtroom, and I was not only forced to go out, I was arrested for 2 weeks. Nobody registered me in the police office. There was no protocol of my detention. Within 3 hours, the same judge, she accused me violating all possible provisions of applicable legislation. She convicted me for 2 weeks of arrest. No lawyer, no relatives of me were allowed to come. During 4 days, I was at the brink of death because of high blood pressure. 4 times an ambulance arrived to me after to this pre-detention center where I was kept. The representatives of the ombudsman office arrived. Then, only then, I was freed. For 4 months, I have been fighting for this fact of my detention to be registered in the register of pre-trial investigations, after the court obliged the prosecutor's office to enter my case into the register of pre-trial investigations. Nothing happened. There is no efficient investigation. I am not recognized as a victim so far, and this is the practices of Kharkiv Regional Prosecutor's Office. There are very many cases where no efficient investigation is conducted. If they if they protect human rights in this way, I will be doing everything in order to punish the judge for her revenge, that just because of these intentions to conduct revenge, she issued a judgment to detain and arrest me for 2 weeks. If the judge remains unpunished, this would give rise to similar precedents in the country. We now see what is here happening now in Kharkiv region. There was shooting and we have 1 dead person. Fatal case. Kharkiv prosecutors often does not uphold civil rights, human rights. I would like to give the floor to Nina Potarska. She will tell us her own experience, what activists working in the Donbass area experience, what prosecution they experience. Thank you for this topic, that you focus attention on it. The conflict, our activities on controlled and uncontrolled territories of Ukraine. Sometimes this topic is and activists are stigmatized. I work both on the government-controlled and uncontrolled territories of Ukraine. 2 years ago, we conducted a sociological survey and also researched into economic ties between controlled and uncontrolled territories of Ukraine. Not all information which I can find is pleasant for the government, not at all. But the problems, the challenges which we face, we try to communicate these problems to the society. We, several months ago, were in the uncontrolled territory in Donetsk Oblast and Lugansk Oblast, in several towns, to be safe there. This is not first my conflict, not first my hotspot where I work as a journalist. It is necessary to accredit for a journalist at the relevant bodies which control the territory. Otherwise, anyone whose work has not been agreed for, they could be either captive or detained, or their work would be hampered and prevented, journalistic work. Also, restrictions and interaction of work in information space. We do not know what is happening in Donetsk and Lugansk in reality, and those people living in Lugansk and Donetsk uncontrolled territories, they don't know what is happening on Ukrainian territory. We were included along with all our personal detail at the Peacemaker website. Our legislation do not forbid stay at the uncontrolled territories, so Peacemaker's website activities we consider, and also posting of our personal details, as we consider this psychological pressure on us and attempts to hinder our activities. So far, as concerns our case, in December 2016, on the 214th article, we filed a claim, but the proceedings have not been initiated because of some magic actions with our documents. Our claim statement disappeared, then it was found again. But after that, the writ issued by the court to initiate the investigation also disappeared somewhere. After that, I agree with my colleague, all these court proceedings take just huge efforts of activists and huge time of the organizations. Such actions to protect themselves may even become impossible if we do not have such ombudsman offices or so on. I have been working for 15 years in our country and as a journalist. What is happening today? This is even worse what we experienced during Kuchma's and Yanukovych's reigns. There are also negative trends on shift in the focus, even public attention. The physical violence against activists became normal there are trends that it has become normal, and where the case concerns political opponents and investigation into violation of their human rights, some consensus appear that these people are to be blamed themselves because they are guilty, as they are not coincide with the political trends in the country. I would like to talk about persecutions of people who were named separatists. Any person may be named a separatist because there is no strict and clear-cut notion of separatist. One person who was 16 years old at Euromaidan, he was not an activist, he was just present there, and this gave the opportunity, this enabled for the public to give consent for grave damage to his health because he was called a separatist. These small steps bring us beyond the framework of human rights. I would like to tell that we have other activists present among our audience in this hall whose cases are described in our report as well. Maybe they will tell about their stories later. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Hummel so that he give his evaluation, his assessment, what he thinks about the report and what recommendations could be given in terms of international standards.
I'm Harry Hummel. I work in the Netherlands Helsinki Committee as Associate Policy Director. For the last 7 years, I've been working in the Helsinki Committee. Before that, I worked in Amnesty International section of the Netherlands. And I have been witnessing the development of the concept of human rights defender and of international standards that describe the way in which human rights defenders should be protected. The first and major step was the decision by the United Nations to create a declaration on the rights of human rights defenders. This was in 1998, so almost 20 years ago. And after that, a whole series of discussions and further standards for the protection of human rights defenders have been developed at the level of the United Nations. This is partly a requirement on governments to refrain from interfering with the work of human rights defenders, to allow them to express their opinions, to allow them freedom of assembly and freedom of association. But partly it is also the requirement of an effort by governments to protect actively human rights defenders. And I think in the current situation of Ukraine and listening to the stories of the people here, this is what is relevant at the moment. There is an active effort needed to protect human rights defenders from attacks, from physical attacks. There is an effort needed in investigations. And there is an effort needed by authorities to counteract stigmatization in the media of human rights defenders. Part of that stigmatization may come from authorities themselves. And this is a phenomenon that you see in many countries. Certain branches of the government or institutions inside the government, they are, feeling pressure from people who claim their human rights, who want to criticize the actions of the government, and they are tempted to take steps that hamper the work of human rights defenders and of people who work in the public interest. At the same time, you see other branches of government who actively work to protect human rights defenders. And what is required by international standards is that active steps are taken by government to comprehensively look at the protection of human rights defenders. And this is not just a legal matter, it is also a matter of the proper development of society. I have a document here by the United Nations High Commissioner of Human Rights about space for civil society. And he says, according space to civil society is not optional. It is a matter of international human rights law that places an obligation on states to respect rights and freedoms that are indispensable for civil society to develop and operate. But he also says that even if the law did not require it, there are compelling reasons to protect civil society space. Effective avenues for civic participation contribute to the cohesion of society and give people, including minorities and those at the margins of society, a way to make their voices heard. So it is both a matter of legal standards and a matter of proper development and healthy development of society, that people who have critical positions towards the government are protected by this same government. This is, in some societies, this may seem paradoxical. The government is authoritarian, and why would you require that same government to protect the people who criticize them? In other societies, and this is what we as human rights defenders want to achieve, it is a measure of civilization that the government allows and even enables and promotes people who criticize that same government. In the OSCE region, the OSCE itself, the organization has created these guidelines for the protection of human rights defenders. A booklet, it is a whole book, but the guidelines itself are a smaller part of the of the book. It says what governments should do, on the basis of established international standards. Much of that comes from the United Nations, some of it comes from the Council of Europe or other international bodies, what the governments should do to protect people who defend human rights in society. And I was in a number of the meetings that were held to create these guidelines. And sometimes I thought, this is strange, why in some countries of the OSCE region, the countries that most oppress human rights defenders, why should you start addressing governments to not do this? It is kind of paradoxical. But I think there are a number of other countries in the OSCE region, and I think Ukraine is one of them, where there is a real possibility to appeal to government to actually step up efforts to protect human rights defenders, to devote resources to steps that, for example, investigate attacks on human rights defenders, to have mechanisms that pinpoint negative legislative initiatives like the one on the e-declaration for anti-corruption activists. In some countries, people have started asking for a specific law on human rights defenders, on the protection of human rights defenders. This is an international report done by an NGO in Geneva with a lot of support from other countries and human rights defenders from around the world. I think this is something that Ukraine and Ukrainian parliamentarians or Ukrainian government could consider to create such a law. But in the end, this remains paper, and paper is patient, as we say in the Netherlands. It means that you have to implement what is in the paper, and implementation cost resources and special efforts and mechanisms. And I think this is the most important thing, that priority and resources are devoted to a number of the steps that are necessary to counter the effects that are mentioned in this report.
Дякую, Гаррі. Зараз ми можемо
Now we can start the round of question and answers. We invited not only journalists but also other activists who are mentioned in this report, and also international institutions, law enforcement officers, representatives. You are welcome to comment. Dear colleagues, introduce yourself, please. Thank you, Olga Kutsko, Deputy Head of NGO, the Rights Sector. I would like to add your report to your report and say that on the part of activists who started the Euromaidan revolution and who has continued our activities on fighting for civil rights in Ukraine. Much has been said today about physical violence, and I'd like to extend that physical beatings by titushkas really take place. They are hired by authorities to beat activists. We know this because we have been experiencing such assaults every day. If there is physical violence in the country, there should be some counteraction, but it is not present in the country. Yesterday I tried to call the security service of Ukraine. They didn't want to talk to me, and after that, in the daytime, they said that they have just a dinner time, and they said that nobody would talk to me because of the dinner time. I arrived to their office because they rejected my phone calls. 8 billions of hryvnias have been embezzled. 98 billions of hryvnias have been embezzled, siphoned from the national budget, and we had information about Mr. Antipov, who had 4 millions in his pocket for petty expenditures. We submitted information about him. We submitted the claim that so-called Lugansk People's Republic government top official is his relative, so it is very likely that he would flee to LPR. And we filed this information, we submitted it to the security service, and the Rights Sector and several other NGOs submitted such statements. Yesterday, when I arrived to the security service, they said, wait for our answer. I answered that if we would wait for 30 days, and this man, Antipенko, would flee to LPR. Well, then some representative of SSU appeared before me, and he answered to me that this our claim is under consideration. So they provoke the activists to do their jobs. So that we would go to this to the place of residence of Mr. Antipенko and prevent his fleeing from the country. I would like to to tell my evaluation of your report. The opinion of right sector and other nationalistic organizations and the majority of Ukrainian population, the minority, inadequate minority, would like to dictate guidelines to normal majority. I stop your speech because now you insult LGBT minorities. Are there any comments? I would like to comment that the rights of minorities they exist in order to protect minorities' rights, so we would prevent any attempts to speak in hatred language, hatred to minorities. We would like all attempts of hatred against minorities to be investigated, both assaults and statements.
Introduce yourself first. Artem Nikolenko, Republic Movement, about the situation. A year ago, my colleague and me were attacked by some youngsters, and they tried to steal our things, and they failed, but we made a claim on this, and there was no response from law enforcers. And the investigation was not started. So the situation is like this. Nothing happened. What I want to say, today we have many assaults and also closure of media resources. LigaNet activists suffered, Katsapas suffered, and also the case restarted in court, and also Alessia Buzina case is not solved. And concerning the situation, I may say that the free state is not when majority is supported. Everyone's rights are protected, including national and ethnic minorities and other minorities, and we should defend the rights of other people. Please, comments or questions? If there are no questions, thank you very much. And our speakers, our guests, they are here. So if you have questions or comments, you can put them off records. Thank you.